Colonel mocked her PT excuse until she removed her jacket and revealed combat shrapnel scars. The sun pressed down on the training field, baking the earth into a cruel, unforgiving surface. Sweat gleamed on the foreheads of young recruits who jogged past in steady formation, lungs burning, boots pounding the dirt like war drums. The air was thick with dust, determination, and the sharp sting of judgment. And then came the voice, harsh, cutting through the air like a blade. Excuses are for the weak. This is the United States Army, not a daycare. Colonel Rourke's bark carried across the field, drawing every eye. He was a man carved from years of command, shoulders squared, chest proud, eyes that burned with the satisfaction of authority. His gaze was fixed on one figure, the lone woman who lagged behind, her strides shorter, her breath uneven, her pace deliberately cautious. He sneered, his words thick with disdain. "What's your excuse, soldier? Not fast enough? Not strong enough? Or just too fragile for this uniform?" The formation slowed, curiosity rippling through the recruits. They glanced sideways at her, waiting to see if she would break, if she would crumble under his words. But she didn't. Sergeant Elena Ramirez simply adjusted the weight of her pack, tightened her jaw, and said nothing. Her silence infuriated him. "Answer me," he snapped. "What kind of soldier hides behind excuses instead of effort?" Her chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, each inhale steady, each exhale measured, though the pain behind her eyes was undeniable. And then slowly, deliberately, she reached for her jacket. With one sharp motion, she pulled it aside. Gasps rippled through the ranks. Across her ribs, etched into her flesh like a permanent testament, were jagged scars, deep, brutal, unmistakable, shrapnel wounds. Colonel Rourke froze. His face, so accustomed to scorn and dominance, faltered into silence. His lips parted but no words came. The scars spoke louder than any defense she could have given. And in that moment, the training field, once filled with the rhythm of boots and barks of command, fell into reverent quiet. Few among them knew her story. They saw only the uniform, the calm eyes, the soldier who never raised her voice yet commanded a gravity that made others fall silent. But Elena Ramirez carried a battlefield in her chest. Years earlier, under a foreign sky lit by fire and chaos, she had stood with her platoon. The acrid scent of smoke and burning fuel clung to the air, mingled with the metallic tang of blood. The ground trembled beneath the thunder of mortars. Her ears rang, not from fear, but from the concussive force of an explosion that had torn through their convoy. Shards of steel ripped into her side, carving pathways of agony across her flesh. She remembered the heat, the searing flash, the desperate gasp for breath, as her brothers in arms dragged her to safety. The medics said she shouldn't have survived, but she did. She survived, while others didn't, and the scars she bore were not just on her skin. They etched themselves into her heart, each line a reminder of those she couldn't save, of the laughter silenced too soon, of the faces forever frozen in memory. On the training field, whispers passed among recruits like sparks jumping from dry tinder. She's seen combat?" One murmured. "She doesn't need to prove anything," another whispered back. But Colonel Rourke's pride bristled. His authority, so publicly challenged, demanded reassertion. "Scars don't excuse weakness," he said sharply, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You wear this uniform, you follow the standard. No exceptions. No." The recruits stiffened. His words stung, not because they rang true, but because they rang hollow. Every scar on her body was an exception carved in blood. Elena remained silent. She pulled her jacket back into place, fastening it slowly, deliberately, her movements calm, almost ritualistic. Her silence was not submission. It was defiance wrapped in dignity. Rourke turned away with a huff, but the image of those scars clawed at him. He had never seen them before, never wanted to imagine the cost soldiers paid beyond the training ground. For him, discipline was measured in miles run, push-ups completed, standards maintained. But scars like hers told a different story. And though he tried to bury it, shame gnawed at him. Elena, meanwhile, carried herself back into formation. Pain tugged at her side with every step, but she did not falter. She remembered nights in field hospitals where antiseptics stung her nostrils, where every breath was a war she wasn't sure she could win. She remembered the trembling hand of a nurse, stitching her torn flesh, the whispered prayers of fellow soldiers as they watched her fight for life. Her silence today was the same silence she had carried then. That evening, Rourke summoned her to his office. His posture was rigid, his jaw tight, but beneath the mask of authority was something less certain. "You embarrassed me in front of my recruits," he said. She met his eyes without flinching. "You embarrassed yourself, sir." The words struck like thunder, not shouted, not angry, but calm, cold, unshakable. For a moment, he saw in her the battlefield he had never walked. He saw the quiet strength of someone who had endured fire and steel, who carried ghosts yet still rose each morning to train beside fresh recruits. Days passed, and whispers became respect. Recruits began watching her more closely, not because she lagged, but because she endured. She became their silent standard, their unspoken inspiration, and slowly, even Rourke could not deny it. One morning, during drills, a recruit collapsed in exhaustion. Rourke opened his mouth to bark at the soldier, but Elena was already there. She knelt beside him, offered her canteen, steadied his shaking hands. She said nothing, but her silence carried more weight than his loudest command. That evening, as recruits sat in mess hall chatter, one of them spoke words that echoed through the camp. "Discipline is taught by officers, but honor is shown by scars." Rourke called for a full company run the following week, determined to reassert his authority. The air was heavy, the humidity brutal, the run unforgiving. Elena kept her steady pace, slower than most but relentless. The recruits who once looked down on her began pacing with her, matching her stride, refusing to leave her behind. One by one, the entire company slowed, not out of weakness, but solidarity. Rourke's face reddened with fury, but beneath it was something else, a growing recognition he could no longer deny. They weren't following his voice anymore. They were following her silence. Finally, at the parade ground weeks later, Rourke addressed the company. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, carried a rare heaviness. "There are lessons no manual can teach," he began. "There are scars that speak louder than medals. And sometimes, the greatest strength is not found in shouting commands, but in the silent endurance of those who've lived through hell and still stand among us." He turned toward Elena. His eyes held hers for a long, unbroken moment. Then, in front of every recruit, Colonel Rourke did something no one expected. He saluted her. The company followed, a sea of hands rising in silent respect. And Elena Ramirez, the soldier once mocked for lagging behind, stood taller than any of them, not because of her scars, but because of what she carried behind them. Her voice, calm and unwavering, finally broke the silence. "My scars are not excuses. They are proof that I've already paid the price you demand of me." And later, when a young recruit asked how she endured, she answered simply, "Strength isn't the absence of pain. It's the choice to keep marching despite it." From that day forward, recruits spoke of her not as the soldier who lagged behind, but as the one who carried invisible weight heavier than any rucksack. Rourke's bark softened, not out of pity, but out of a newfound understanding. And the training field itself seemed to shift from a place of judgment to a place of respect. In the end, Elena Ramirez's silence had shouted louder than any colonel's voice. And her scars, once mocked, became the very standard of honor. Silent heroes walk among us every day, carrying battles the rest of the world never sees. Their strength is not in what they say, but in what they endure. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of unseen strength. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. And if you believe in honoring the silent heroes among us, subscribe for more stories that remind us respect is earned not by words, but by sacrifice.